This paper is meant to shock, you know. It's not. It's meant to be a shocking paper.
好，这个时间到了，是这样，今天呢，就是由这个汤博士呢给大家呢做一个关于这个后现代或者后人类政治方面的一个专题的报告。这个讲座呢，其实是应该说几年以前他就跟我讨论过了这个话题，他不是1年2年，那个相当长时间了。因为我认识他，他们呢也如果算起来已经有这个7、8年的时间了，因为他原来是我小孩的老师，这个是小孩的这个教英语的老师，那我这个是我发现这个一个惊讶的发现，他原来还是一个研究尼采的正儿八经的博士，是专责研究尼采的专家，长期可以说是一辈子就主要从事的是尼采的研究，尼采研究。那么退休以后呢，他有时候到中国来，就是从事这个英语方面的教学，但是他讲的英语可不是普通的我们讲 ABC 那个意义上的英语，他来跟他们讲什么，就讲哲学的。给我小孩子上什么课呢？讲康德，讲康德的美学，讲康德的这种就是哲学思想，那对于高中生来讲，大家这个是充满了好奇，所以我认识了以后呢，我进入知道他原来是研究尼采的专家，尼采不管怎么样，现在你们可能听起来觉得尼采已经是可以不需要认真对待了。我们当年读大学时候呢，这个尼采除了马克思以外，中国人就是最崇拜的一个思想家就是尼采，其他的像沙特这一些，就是都在排在尼采后面的，像罗斯这一些根本就是不讲中影的。那现在就罗斯很重要，我们都忘记尼采了，因为尼采是个转折性的一个人物，就是在对待人的问题上，对待人类的问题上。这个我今天把这本书也带来了，这里面这本书就是这个罗斯这一任当中也没有忽视，也没有忘记尼采，他对他里面也有专门谈到了尼采的思想。什么思想呢？有一个很重要的思想，就是讲的这个什么叫做怎么样做一个杰出的人，杰出的人类，作为个体的人类就是杰出性的是可能的，但是整个人类是不可能的，这个是尼采的观点。所以呢，真正的杰出人物只能是个体性意义上的，我们这个人类要实现自我超越是不可能的，个别的人是可以的，而这个个别的人，他们创造的价值，就达到一种什么呢？就是至上意义上的，就最高意义上的。所以我们一般的人只能讲，就是我们说起来怎么呢？就是有个美好生活的向往，这个就够了。但是呢，人活着不是为了美好生活而来的，这就是尼采的思想，这就是尼采思想。那么这种思想呢，在道德哲学上叫做至上论，或者叫做这个完美主义，或者叫做完善主义。现在完美主义呢，变成是一个从心理角度来讲，变成是个病态的考量，所以呢，现在我们把它翻译成叫做完善主义，完善论。或者叫做至上论，至上论，这是尼采的思想。那当然，尼采在往前追，他是可以跟亚里士多德这个联系在一起，就是那种德性论，德性论，这个是我们人类学当中的国家的德性，就是它的一种，就是公正正义，就是它是国家有的一种美德，所以这个都可以呢就紧密的联系在一起的，那么今天呢，就是他们讲的专题呢是关于这个叫做后人类的。我们前2天。也有同学们你们就包同学也去参加关于那个人工智能的那个会议了，其实也涉及到这个话题当然角度不一样，所以下面呢我们就请这个他们呢博士给大家就是讲的专题非常感谢。
So this is my name, and I am the founder of the World Posthuman Society, and we started it with a couple of colleagues from New York, Francesco Ferrando and Luis Tanso at NYU and New School for Social Research. So we have an online journal called Infinity, and we are connected with the World Congress of Philosophy. This is a quote from Nietzsche. Nietzsche will appear from time to time in the course of my paper. Humanity is a rope tied between ape and overhuman, he says. And this is one of my leading professors when I was a graduate student, Robert Paul Wolff. He wrote A Defense of Anarchism and a book on understanding roles and a book on understanding Marxist capital, Das Kapital. And he was loosely associated with the Marx-Freud synthesis and the Frankfurt School. Okay, let me begin. My title is A Posthuman Conception of Justice for Our Non-Human Others, Getting Beyond the Philosophy of Evil. Posthumanism has its roots in postmodernism and its program of deconstruction. Although cloaked as a literary movement, deconstruction was a justice movement. Deconstruction had its roots in American 60s activism and women's rights, civil rights, Native American rights, Black African American rights, environmental activism, and its crossover with feminism called ecofeminism, and other lesser-known justice movements. Deconstruction came to the fore to address self-other dualistic thinking, characteristic of colonial culture, where self defines itself in terms of normalcy, and other becomes whatever exhibits a shortfall from that definition. Deconstruction focused on able, white, propertied male heterosexuals, essentially the ruling class of colonialism. There are many others to this class, the others of Africans and Asians, of course, and the others of women, of freaks, carnivalesques, cowering LGBTQs, irreverent mockers of normalcy, one and all, scribbling away at the literature of deflation in nooks and crannies around the world. The European colonization of America led to the extermination of over 145 million Aboriginal people, where the other entirely ceased to be human and became a subhuman animal to be exterminated. I want to take us beyond postmodernism's deconstructive strategy for dealing with self-other dualisms. Self-other dualisms are centering and hierarchizing. The other is marginalized and subordination applies. Self-other dualisms instate the relationship of domination to the subjection of a vulnerable class. In postmodernism, deconstruction is a moral argument. It assumes that we are moral agents and tractable to a showing of wrongdoing. This will seem to be its shortcoming, whence the subtitle of my paper, Getting Beyond the Philosophy of Evil. In general, the problem with assuming that we are moral agents tractable to a showing of wrongdoing is why then can't we ever be moral? I do not believe in a moral order. The belief in moral agency is a bulwark of humanism. It is our capacity for moral action, it is argued, which distinguishes us from animals and other divisions of nature. I do not think we have this distinction, and I want to shift the discussion away from the moralizing of domination and self-other dualisms to the question of how domination evolved and how we can address it at the level of evolution. The problem I face in taking this position is that it would seem to be philosophically unsatisfying because it leaves us with no basis for normative criteria of human behavior. Didn't Hume sort this with his distinction between what is as not containing and what? But I think that developments in modern theory of comparative evolution can offer normative criteria that rule against self-other dualisms. That, of course, will take a bit of showing, trying to get outside of this traditional concept of morality as the only way to generate a normative criteria. As a natural phenomena, domination is a craving. The self of domination emerges as hyper-attentiveness to the vulnerability of the other. Vulnerability is attractive to domination as the open doorway for its craving to control freedom. It is a relationship of power, and vulnerability is susceptibility to power. Domination begins by configuring the vulnerable other as a refractory other, something wrong, a state of fraudulence and inauthenticity in a hierarchized relationship with a centered self. Shaming in traditional Chinese culture is similar. It too robs authenticity and implies fakery as the original situation of the other and is an exercise of domination and power struggling. Shaming can be confronted. The effective response to it is by reference to competencies acquired through identification with the principle of life, such as in life's drive to be stronger, or in life's discovery of itself in freedom. The brazen face of indifference replaces the face of shame. The first step in domination is to displace the existing self then, with the refractory other. It imputes an imagined state of refraction, easy to impose on vulnerability, as a failure to comply with obedience to normalcy. Domination has been in our world for a long time, beginning in the West with the rise of the agricultural revolution in the Middle East and exploitation of the vulnerable others of women, children, and nature foremost. But what does the domineering person get out of doing this? Recently, in mid-October, I warn you now, I'm going to show you some screens that are very disturbing. Recently, in mid-October of this year, at a re-election campaign meeting for Donald Trump in his Miami resort, a video was played in which he was portrayed in acts of fantasy violence against his political foes, countercultural liberation movements, and the press. He is seen igniting a cigarette butane lighter into the face of his socialist political opponent, Bernie Sanders, stabbing Hillary Clinton in the throat, plunging a knife into a figure on which was superimposed the logo for feminist power, and the same for the logo for Black Lives Matter. He is seen attacking various African-American political opponents, Maxine Walters and Barack Obama, whom he appears to decapitate. He attacks proxies for all the media, CNN, NBC, ABC, NPR, by shooting them in the face. The images of violence in which we see Trump engaged fulfill the fantasy life of his supporters. Seeing the video, I thought, how is this different from Nazi World War II propaganda? Suppose we saw a video of Hitler shooting and maiming Jews, Slavs, communists, freethinkers, Freudians, gypsies, LGBTQs, all the many others that ended up in concentration camps. Fascism in Asia followed suit. Fascism is the psychology of domination and self-other dualisms on steroids, and it is back today as strong as it was after World War II, despite everyone's confidence at that time that fascism was forever defeated. Domination and self-other dualisms persist despite all the efforts of moral argumentation. This argument witnessed millions of people killed horribly because of the self-other dualistic thinking in World War II. So if you did not know it before, now you know that it is immoral to light a butane cigarette lighter into the face of Bernie Sanders, right? That argument would seem to have no takers. Either there is no moral order at all, or domination is beyond appeal to it. A philosophy of evil has been no help to us in studying fascism or stopping it. So these screens, I'll show you about, they document some of the things that have been going on in America. This is a book about how the internet was used to organize support for Donald Trump. Here is a shocking image of a conservative newspaper reporter who is a well-known political commentator seen on television giving the Nazi salute to Donald Trump. The German means altogether, say Sieg Heil. I'll tell you what Sieg Heil means. This is a gentleman who is a neo-Nazi by the name of Richard Spencer. And he is saying in this newspaper interview that he foresees an America as a gathering place for Europeans, and that it would be a new society based on different ideals than the Declaration of Independence, the particular ideal being that all men are created equal, men and women are created equal. There is Richard Spencer putting his support to Donald Trump. Here are demonstrations of people acknowledging their neo-Nazi political identification in support of Donald Trump. They salute Trump's election victory with Heil victory. Sieg Heil means hail victory. I'll tell you in a minute. There it is. That is the statue known as the winged victory of Samothrace. It was found in the Greek island of Samothrace. It's now in the Louvre. And the Nazis saw each other, and when they saw each other, they saluted each other with the word Sieg Heil, which means Sieg is victory and Heil is hail. So it's as if they are seeing the incarnation of victory in each other. Here are some American white supremacists walking with loaded weapons, automatic military-grade weapons, to enforce white culture. Which means, of course, against Hispanics, against not only people of different color, but LGBTs and all other many others to self. There's Donald Trump screaming at a protester for complaining that he is a racist and it represents the political spectrum of wing of neo-Nazis. Here is a protester shot. Doesn't look like he's doing anything terribly subversive, except complaining that a neo-Nazi, Donald Trump, is now president of the United States. Here are some of our most famous LGBTQ members. Allen Ginsberg was the greatest poet of World War II. So he is, of course, part of the marginalized grouping of the white nationalists. Tennessee Williams was one of our greatest poets and playwrights, probably one of the greatest playwrights since the ancient Greeks. All of those people, not just people of gender, but not just women, it's a whole range. See, it's not just the racist thing. So homophobia has characterized the rise of fascism. So Donald Trump went through lots of efforts to make sure that inclusive language was taken from any of the U.S. government websites that acknowledged alternative lifestyles as acceptable in America. Here's a man who was the president, I guess, of a library, and he was a supporter of Donald Trump, and he burned all of the LGBTQ books in the library and said it's what the Germans should have done. And here are the disturbing videos from Donald Trump's rally in Miami in October. Here he is igniting a butane cigarette lighter into the face of socialist opponent Bernie Sanders. Here he is decapitating Obama. This is my country. So political discourse, this is political discourse under fascism. It has no meaning. So this is was a t-shirt that was popular while Trump was running for election, and now here he is stabbing Hillary Clinton in the throat. You can't find these. These were all taken down the internet, but they're not available anymore. You're looking at the only surviving chunks of it. Here is a governor of Texas making a joke that once he began picturing newspaper reporters as when he went out in shooting practice on the target range, his aim became so much better. So here he is saying, see, I pretended that this was a newspaper reporter from CNN or some other news outlet that is antagonistic to Donald Trump. And look, it so improved my aim that I was able to shoot him 5 times in the chest. And here's Donald Trump at that same Miami video shooting a representative of CNN in the face. Here is a very typical person in America who represents the women's movement, women's pride, feminist pride. Does not look like he's about to blow anything up. And here's Donald Trump. You'll notice that is the symbol for feminism, for femininity is the cross, and then the masculine is the circle with the arrow. And this has been modified to make a raised fist of power. So this symbol represents women's power. Might be aware that Donald Trump was accused by 30 or 40 women of sexual abuse. So here he is shooting them in the face. Here's Donald Trump threatening civil war. This is democracy. Unless you support me somehow, try to undermine my presidency, my supporters may start a civil war, which is a way of telegraphing to his supporters that violence is now acceptable in America. And since his election, all of 99% of all the terrorist acts that have been committed in America has been terrorist, white supremacist, domestic terrorism. Newspaper articles questioning, will there be a civil war and where will the U.S. military stand? 490,000 Americans died fighting fascism in World War II, and here it is in America after all. Very disturbing. To resume my paper, I'm on page 4. Deconstructing dualisms that pit human self against human other is the starting point of posthumanism. But posthumanism is post-anthropocentric and goes beyond human to human other dualisms to deconstruct the most general dualism of human against all non-human others. 200 species become extinct every day because of human activity, setting off the 6th mass extinction of life on Earth. Various streams of research fed into this project. We extended rights for animals as we began to realize that animals have language capacity, beginning with Kodo, who was a gorilla who could sign in 500 characters. We realized that animals have affective capacities, observing elephants who appear to grieve for lost comrades. The work of Peter Singer has had a big impact on post-human philosophers. Recently, Argentina recognized orangutans as non-human persons. Much to the liking of post-humanists, the Amazon rainforest was recognized recently as a life form by the Colombian government and as an entity subject of rights. See, this is beyond extending, this is beyond humanism, beyond the central of the human. So now in Colombia, the rainforest has rights as a human being, but those rights were utterly disregarded by Brazil's current leader, Trump groupie Jair Bolsonaro. It seems it never takes long for a declaration of a right not to be dominated to provoke a counter, and usually an aggressive one. Posthumanism tries to see past the current Anthropocene, and that may be the strongest basis of its outrage against humanism. But until now, the strategy has been to deconstruct human non-human dualisms by extending the predication of rights to non-human others. That has to stop somewhere to be meaningful, but how can it? In her book, Vibrant Matter, post-human philosopher Jane Bennett pointed to the self-organizing properties of matter, crystals that can self-organize on liquids into a unidirectional nanowire. Should rocks have rights? I think that would dilute the concept of right and also still be anthropocentric. Here are some issues of climate change. There was a climate strike in students protesting climate change in Dublin because we have so much of the issue of self versus other involves the other of nature, and the domination of nature and the exploitation of nature is a thing to be used for humans, and humans are at the center. I'm going to attempt a deconstruction of human non-human dualisms by rejecting the strategy of extending rights predications to non-human others, and instead deny that they have any application to anything at all, including to humans, and deconstruct hierarchy in that way. This leaves us with a problem if we're going to continue with the project of philosophy, because after all, philosophy is about norms, and if I am not violating moral rule by dominating nature, what consideration can be brought forward against my doing it? I would suggest that domination runs afoul of a normative idea of developmental evolution. There's no such thing. I'm about to explain what that means. If there is such a thing, then I will have just defined it. I must concede that I really cannot claim to be bringing justice to our non-human others in this way, but at least it will rid us of what we consider injustice without giving rocks rights. Here is the rainforest set on fire under Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil lately this summer because, after all, by clearing the rainforest, it becomes available land for raising cattle, and that's good for the beef industry. In addressing self-other dualisms, deconstruction employs a distinctive argument about the moral improbity of the dualism. Deconstruction is philosophy, and it refers to a philosophy of evil for its normative statements against self-other dualisms, but it is an impoverished conceptual framework. I'm a Nietzschean. I'm getting us beyond good and evil. But if so, what's the point of philosophers in investigating self-other dualisms, as there would seem to be no way to prescribe against them? Nietzsche faced the same problem in taking us beyond good and evil, but still making normative statements about the overhuman. So what's the basis of the norm? This will be one of several times I will reference Nietzsche in relation to the Marx-Freud synthesis, unlikely a fit as that would seem to be. I will make my case for thinking about Nietzsche together with Marx and Freud throughout. So Nietzsche, the philosopher beyond good and evil, still wrote this plainly normative statement. Human beings are not progressing. Higher types are achieved, but they do not last. The level of the species is not being raised. Now, obviously he thinks it should be. Well, why? If the argument isn't because it's good. And this one too. It is not to be believed that the relative value of ascent over life, over the decline of life, has yet to be set forth. Well, what is the value to be found in the ascent of life over the decline of life, if not that the ascent of life is good? So how is Nietzsche making these normative statements if he is taking us beyond good and evil? And I think he does have a way to do it, and I'm going to try to do the same thing. So he had the idea that life is declining in our species and that we should take charge of evolutionary trajectory and set life on an ascending incline. But why is that something we should do? Because it's just that we've just taken ourselves out of the moral order, denied that it exists, denied that there are moral phenomenon, denied that there is a moral realm, denied that human beings are capable of good and evil. We are thoroughly naturalized in a naturalized setting, and where are norms in a naturalized setting? The moral argument of deconstruction begins by pointing out that the canonical features that make up self, by contrast to which other is a shortfall and constituted as other, is based on specious thinking. Self as white versus African as a shortfall of being white, and therefore other is an example. Any racism. Deconstruction employs the argument of relativism, citing empirical facts to show that the properties that purport to establish self as canonical and other as a shortfall are not universals. Here's how it works. We deconstruct the idea of a black-skinned African as a shortfall of being a white-skinned European by pointing out the all-deflating fact that white skin evolved as melanin levels dropped as populations moved northward into weaker sunlight. Melanin is a chemical that's in your skin. It protects the skin from strong sunlight, but higher levels inhibit the production of vitamin D into the skin. So as populations move northward into weaker sunlight, melanin levels dropped to promote vitamin D production in the skin, but that meant that skin turned white. That's all why they're white people. It's really not a big deal. And if we were to put Europeans back into Africa in 10 to 20,000 years, higher melanin levels will return to protect their skin from stronger sunlight, but their skin will turn black again. That's where relativism comes in. The argument just of deconstruction just repeats itself for all other characteristics. Deconstruction has made its case, so it thinks, when it exposes that the self as normal and other as shortfall dualism is just bias. And then goes on to make the point that being biased, it can be recognized finally as part of the institution of power over vulnerability. Whence its connection to colonialism. Deconstruction is deconstructing colonialism. As no more than an empty bias, fabricated to exert power over vulnerability, the self-other dualism is now deconstructed and reduced to injustice. That's what deconstruction tries to do. Hey, these dualisms are just a form of bias, they have no basis in reality, and they are, now that we see that they're biased, they are serving injustice, and now we should fix that. I think that's idiotic. I want norms just as much as anybody else, but this is silly thinking. What are deconstruction's presuppositions here? What temptation exactly is it that is involved in being a white supremacist that is supposedly exposed by deconstruction, presupposing as it does that the dominance to subordination relationship is a phenomenon of moral improbity? What's the temptation to do that? Why am I tempted to be immoral in being a white racist? It's making no sense. What might that be? Is it unjust temptation to dominate the vulnerable other and institutionalize power just greed? Is that the temptation? Is colonialism just greed? But I find it very unrealistic to so absolutize greed to this point where it becomes an uber vice. It is unrealistic to state that the excesses of greed we see in the modern world is capitulation to an extreme of moral improbity. This is my impoverishment of the philosophy of evil argument. John D. Rockefeller, founder of Standard Oil, was worth over $300 billion at his death. That much money would seem to outstrip